This episode is brought to you by CarMax. Searching for your next car? Don't settle. Thrive. At CarMax, it's easy to shop online or in person. With upfront pricing and tools designed to help, finding a car you love has never been easier. Plus, you can sell or trade in your current vehicle with an online offer in minutes. No strings attached. Start shopping now to find a car you'll love at CarMax.com. CarMax, the way it should be.
Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/qualify today.
The temple's gone. We need to write this down so that we don't forget, because we're scattered into all the nations. And so in there, it describes what you said. And that is, from the time of Moses until the first century, there were 9 red heifers that were, and they even had Moses, Ezra, they got the names of all the priests that were doing this. So that's all written down, and really, we'd call that ancient history. And so one of the other things that they do now is when they talk about it being red, it doesn't necessarily be like crimson red or bright red like we would know. It could be brown, a brownish red. But the Bible, God didn't say, hey, you have to have this many hairs or non-hairs. Well, the rabbis are thinking, well, we want to follow the commandment, and their heart was to follow the commandment. So we're gonna make sure to do this. So we're gonna bring these extra rules to make sure we don't err. And so the rule that they have today is you can have a black hair over here and a black hair over there on these cows. You can. But if there's more than one black hair or non-red hair in a single follicle, then it's out. So that's why you see them down there with their magnifying glasses.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Thank you for tuning into Blurry Creatures podcast. Got a lot going on these days. We're going to get to it real quick here. If you are a member, you will have first chance at buying conference tickets. BlurryCon 2 is happening. Tickets go on sale April 29th at 10 a.m. Members will get an email right before those tickets go on sale. And last year, you guys bought all of the tickets before they went on sale to the public. So if you want to have first chance at getting tickets, blurrycreatures.com/members. Tomorrow night, April 24th, we're doing a live event with Ali Siadatin on the gods of Egypt. And if you want to be a part of that, also become a member. blurrycreatures.com/members. Lots of stuff going on for members. Tickets, events, chat rooms, exclusive episodes. If you're not supporting the show yet, what are you doing? Come on down. We make it worth your while. A couple bucks a month, nothing big. And you get to support what's going on here on the podcast. Let's get Mondo Gonzales on this one and talk about the Red Heifer. Thank you guys so much for supporting this podcast, and I hope everyone gets to come to BlurryCon who wants to. See you guys there. All right, welcome back to Blurry Creatures. Today we have a fun guest. Thank you for coming on the show, Mondo Gonzales. You're an author, podcaster, pastor for a long time. You have a graduate degree in biblical archaeology. You can find Mondo hosting Prophecy Watchers, and appreciate you coming on Blurry Creatures to talk about your book. Mainly, I'm sure we're going to talk about that. We're going to get more into the Red Heifer stuff. We did an episode a couple weeks ago, and it's one of the most popular episodes we've done in a short amount of time. It's kind of wild how many people are interested in this subject. But welcome to the podcast, Mondo, and we kick it off like always. We ask everyone, just because we started in the Bigfoot space. What are your thoughts on Bigfoot? I know you got some thoughts on the big guy. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure, guys, and I listen to you all the time, and of course, I love the Bigfoot. I can tell you this: I was always the kid that got the thing not working up to full potential, right, by the teachers, and so I never was interested in anything. I don't think I actually even read a book until I was out of high school on my own. I didn't have that, but there was one book. For some reason, I was like in the 4th grade, and I went to this little school, and little Catholic school, and in the library, which is again half of a room, they had a book on Bigfoot, and that was my favorite book. I'm like, what in the world? And so since then, I've kind of been enamored by it. And then growing up in Oregon, Oregon, Washington, that's where I grew up, and being out in the forest all the time, you hear the stories. And then I had a chance to pastor in Washington State, in Southwest Washington, and this was it was in a town called Yakult, beautiful area. I mean, stunning area. But right near there is a mountain called Silver Star Mountain, which is where the Bigfoot, the BFRO guys actually took a chopper and landed it on this mountain. And so I'm very much a fan, and lots of people there have their stories. They actually did a thing in a nearby town there. Anyways, all that to say, I got lots of stories, and in my adventures, I used to be a long distance runner. I don't do that much of that here in Oklahoma, but I still run. But I was running, 20, 30 miles at a time, and I'd go up in the hills. Well, I went out this one morning, and I was the first one there. People dismiss some of the stuff. You guys know that. Oh, it's just this, that.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, look, no, it wasn't. Somebody wasn't out there with a footprint board. I was the first one out there. Me and another guy who we were running. It was fresh snow. Had snowed the night before, and we're out running on this trail, which we had to find as we were running. And sure enough, we came along this area of the trail, which had some patches of snow on it. It wasn't fully covered. And my buddy was out using the restroom. Okay. And I'm like, you go over there, I'll be here. I looked down, and no kidding, there's this, what looked like a print. I don't know if it's a print. I took a picture of it. I sent it to you guys. And I'm like, what in the world is this? And it was gigantic. It had all the impressions of the toes. It had the heel impression. It had even the midpoint of the heel was up. You could see where it was a 100% a perfect. But the problem that you have, people always say, well, were there others? Well, on this particular spot, the wind was blowing, and so there was only snow on this one part of the trail. The rest of it had been sheltered by a ridge, and so there was no snow on it. And I couldn't see anything else. And again, I'm a very much eager into stuff like this. So do I believe? Well, I'm a very strong. I have no proof, but I certainly think that with all of the anecdotal stories that we know and other evidences, especially up in Washington. I mean, this is around Mount St. Helens. There's a Bigfoot museum up there. So
yeah.
It's there.
Yeah. We released, as Nate said, we released this episode on the Red Heifer day after Valentine's Day. So just about 2 months ago. And you reached out because, we knew each other, and you talked about how you wrote this book. You've been studying this thing for 30 years. And then you sent this picture of the footprint. And I was like, this is our guy. I mean, he's, we were reminiscing on pre-roll here about how, Nate and I are from Northern California, and you're from the Pacific Northwest, and you also were in Tahoe, and there's some squatchy places out there. Have you thought at all about what you think Bigfoot might be? Because then we started this podcast like that, right? There's really kind of two camps. It's either it's a remnant ape like a Gigantopithecus that's still out there, or you have sort of the other that involves the woo. Any thoughts on what it might be?
I've written a lot on the Nephilim and Genesis 6 and other things in my life, and especially in my academic work. And so that certainly is a legitimate possibility in my mind that it is a remnant, especially because of, I think, of all the interesting kind of supernatural encounters that happen, being in and out and disappearing and other things. To me, it's just, I'm an academic, I'm a scientist guy, but yet there's no answers for some of these things, except sometimes some of the more interesting, even supernatural elements.
Yeah. It's amazing to me how many times people that will come on, wrote a book about something else, will have a Bigfoot story, and somewhere in their family. I mean, it's incredible to me. I've never had an experience myself with Bigfoot, but how many people, Mondo, have had an experience? Authors, pastors, people who aren't in this space, have a Bigfoot story of some kind. And it's almost half. I want to say half of the people that come on our show have some weird story, whether it happened to them or somebody they know and trust. So it's so bizarre that it's controversial.
Yeah.
Why we're here is you spent the last 30 years really covering, looking into, and then of last year book, The Red Heifer Ritual came out. 2023, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, just last September. Mm-hmm.
Perfect timing.
You know, we did this episode, as I said, 2 months ago with our friends Chi-Chi and crew over at Faith and Fiction. And this is a much bigger story. And as we're recording right now, looking into next week being Passover, there's a lot of things that are still have yet to play out. But I really wanted you, this being your expertise, I would love to get what we think is going to happen and where we're at, right? But I think in order to get there, I would love for you to just kind of break down why we're here, what the history of the red heifer is, why that's important, and then we can kind of bring us up to speed. But I think the historical aspect of this is very important because, you know, I think one of the things I want to point out and I want to say at the beginning is there's some interesting feedback we got on the episode, and it was like Christians shouldn't care about this. Jesus is the third temple.
Yeah.
Why are you excited about this? This is the temple of the Antichrist, and Christians shouldn't be celebrating this. And I don't think anyone was celebrating that at all in our episode. In fact, I think what's fascinating, and if you want to say what's exciting, is that we are seeing in real time biblical prophecy happening in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
The best coast just got better. Introducing Ovation of the Seas, sailing from LA next summer. Conquer record-breaking thrills on the biggest ship in the West, like skydiving, bumper cars, and flowrider surf sessions. Plus more than 15 dining options available on board, all between discoveries in Ensenada and even overnights in Cabo. You've never done Mexico like this, and it all begins June 2025 from Los Angeles. This is the boldest way to Baja. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Itineraries vary by sail date, ships registry Bahamas.
It's Croctober, the official celebration of Crocs fans like you. So whether you like to rock your classic clogs, get cozy and fuss-lined, personalize with your favorite Jibbitz charms, or even, you know, dress up like a clog for Halloween, it's time to tell your story and share your style. Join the Croctober celebration with Crocs fans around the world. Go to crocs.com to discover the range of shoes and find a pair that's iconic like you. Crocs, celebrating you all month long.
Yeah, I think what you said is exactly right, that there are several camps, as we know, within, you know, I'm a peacemaker. I love all my brothers and sisters in Christ. And even though we have different viewpoints on eschatology, and some of the camps that don't see any future, you know, the Revelation, the book of Revelation for them is past, or it's not, it's maybe idealistic or historicist, whatever. There's different viewpoints, but I take it as being futuristic, and no doubt. But so for them, they're like, what are you guys talking about? And there's what's to see here? And so the short story of, you know, is when the 5 cows got flown over in September 15th of 2022, when I saw that there was a lot of press, there was a lot of discussion about it. And I remember at the time I had been writing about the red heifers for a long time. And I thought, wow, 5. And I thought, you know, this is interesting. And so that's what inspired me. I thought, you know what, I should write a book about this, because I think as it develops, whether it's this group of 5 or another group of 5, it's not going away. And I'll explain why. I thought I really should write something that helps the average Christian understand why is this important and what's the background, because it does appear in the Bible in Numbers chapter 19. Originally, you know, God gave the instructions to Moses about this animal. But let me step back for a moment on that, because the reason why it's important is because what we do know in Daniel 9:27, Daniel predicts that there's going to be offerings and sacrifices at the end of the age that are going to be taken away. That's the way it's phrased. He'll make a covenant with many, and in the middle of the week, the offerings and the sacrifices will cease. And so you have the Antichrist figure stopping these sacrifices. Well, if you take that in a future way, as being very literal, you're going to go, well, wait a minute, there's no temple at the end. What are we talking about? So it assumes right there, in order for that scripture to be fulfilled, there has to be a temple, a physical temple where blood is being spilled with these animals. And then we know in Matthew 24:15, where Jesus is describing the end of the age, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. Well, if you understand the Old Testament, my undergrad is in Jewish studies. So this is why I was write this. I know the Mishnah and the rabbinic writings and stuff. I thought, I'll write this. But when Jesus says the holy place, anybody that knows the Old Testament is going to go, oh, that's the temple. You have the Holy of Holies, and then you have the holy place, which is where the altar of incense is. It's where the table of showbread is. It's where the menorah is. And so that's a physical location. And then you have Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2 describing that when the Antichrist comes, the man of lawlessness, he will go into the temple of God and he will declare himself to be God and sit there. Mm-hmm. And so that's a physical, you go, oh, well, if that happens in the temple, how does that happen? And then in Revelation 11, you see John writing and being given a stick to measure the temple complex. And it says, leave out the outer courts. Those are given to the Gentiles, but measure the people that are there. So you have these 4 different references. And that's really the base, is that when you look at prophetic history, or prophetic history that we know is going to be history, it's future, but there's going to be this coming temple. And so right out of the gate, we have 4 witnesses that show it. And so let me just make a comment about what you said, because as with anything in interpretation of the Bible, there's a Greek word naos, N-A-O-S, and it's the word for temple. We know that in the New Testament, that word can be used in 3 different ways. One is the physical temple, where they were walking around, where Jesus was teaching very clearly. We also know in John chapter 2 that Jesus makes the comment that if you destroy this temple, I will raise it up in 3 days. Well, he says this, and they're like, what do you mean, this temple? And so they're thinking he's talking about the temple of his body. And they're going, what do you mean? This temple has been in work for 46 years, and you're just going to redo it? And so they misunderstood his figurative reference. So no one is denying that word can be figurative, depending on the context. Clearly, John chapter 2, John even helps us understand. He was speaking of the temple of his body. We also know in 1 Corinthians 6:19, when Paul is writing about our physical bodies and about sexual immorality, he says, don't defile your temple. Don't you know your body is a temple? So talking about the physical body. And then the last instance that we see is in 1 Corinthians 3:16, where he's talking about the church. When the church is gathered together, you're a temple, you're a collective. Mm-hmm. So those are our 3 options. And so when you go to Jesus talking about the abomination standing in the holy place, you're like, well, is that referring to the Jerusalem temple? Is it referring to my physical body? Or is it referring to the church? And you go, well, there's only really one that makes sense in context, and it's the Jerusalem temple. So we know. And again, you can look at the Antichrist. Is he going to sit in my body and declare himself to be God? Probably not. Is he going to do it in the church? No, the church, if you're a pre-trib person, the church isn't even around. So it makes sense that he's in the physical temple. So people that say that, I want to affirm them. Yes, you're right. There are nuances and contexts where that is the case. But as we look at the overall picture, there will be a future temple. And that leads us to, the red heifer. Yeah. Because, and I try to tell people, hey, everybody, look, I'm not endorsing this. Okay. Like you said, I'm excited about the fact that the Third Temple movement has been around since 1967, when they reconquered Jerusalem and they took possession of it. Right. The Third Temple's been in movements there. And so we see all of that happening from 1988, the Temple Institute, etc. But the fact that they're doing that shows us that Scripture is going to be true. Jesus said it, again, all of them say it. This is what we see. So the fact that these Jewish rabbis are trying to build the temple, they don't know they're fulfilling New Testament prophecy. Of course not. Right. And so, but in their mind, and here's the key, in their mind, they don't believe in Jesus. For them to honor God is to have sacrifices, because that's what Moses commanded, and they call it a mitzvah. It's a commandment. So for them, they're thinking, okay, in order to do that and to fulfill the commandments of God, well, we need to cleanse not only the area of the Temple Mount, but we need to purify the people, and we need to purify the priests. And how do you do that? Well, the only way you do that, in the sense of ritual purity, is through having a red heifer. That's what Numbers 19. So again, this isn't unbiblical. So for them, they have been trying to get red heifers for a long time, since the 80s. Yeah. Now you have these 5 that they have purchased $100,000 each, $250,000 to ship them over. They have considerable investment in here, and their goal is to offer one of them on the Mount of Olives in order to get the ashes, mix them with water, and then purify all these things so that they then can build the temple. So this is the last thing I'll say here is they can build the temple. If the politics and the government allowed, they hypothetically could build the temple right now. They just couldn't use it. They need the red heifer in order to purify.
When is the earliest prophecy of the temple being rebuilt?
It would go back to Daniel 9:27, even before. So this is 600 BC, which is even before the second temple was built. I mean, when he's writing this, depending on people did the dating of the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, he destroyed the temple in basically 587 BC, 586. That's the dates of scholars. And so he potentially, Daniel could have been writing this prediction before the first temple was even destroyed. And he's talking about this third temple that comes at the end of the age because it's connected with the Antichrist.
And I don't understand why, Mondo, people think that just because prophecy happens that it's good or bad. You know what I mean? It's just saying these things are going to happen. And Luke and I do this a lot on our show. We talk about Bigfoot, aliens, and all these things, and people think that we're somehow endorsing these topics. Like, no, there's just data and there's facts, and people are seeing these things. And I think a lot of Christians bring in their views and their emotions into the discussion. Like, this is just the data. This is just what's happening. Yeah. It's unfolding, and we got to talk about it because it's going to come out more and more. And then what do you do with it once it's on the scene, so to speak?
I think that's the key right there. Is that's what I kind of felt led to do and write the book, because I noticed there was a lot of emotion about it. And interestingly, I have a chapter in the book where I ask several questions of others, other prophecy teachers, and said, hey, should we be excited about this? Should we support it, like with money as Christians? And could God be working behind the scenes to help make this happen in order to fulfill prophecy? And it's amazing to me how many people, they have this knee-jerk reaction at times, and they emotion. It is emotion in that, number one, even if they believe in a third temple, they're very much against it because they think if we talk about it, that we're somehow diminishing what Jesus did on the cross. And I'm like, that's the farthest thing from my view. I mean, Jesus is the final sacrifice. So I wrote a chapter in the book as well on the significance of the red heifer in the New Testament. It appears in Hebrews chapter 9 and in Hebrews 13. And so no one's taking anything away from Jesus here. We're simply saying what you said. Bible says this is a fact. You have this snapshot of history. There's going to be this temple, and we are excited because of it shows that the end of the age is arriving and that Jesus is going to return and fix the world. Which Christian wouldn't be excited about that? So I'm not excited. I'm not excited even, for example, if you talk about the tribulation period where half of the world is going to die. I'm not excited about that at all. Why would I be? No way. But I'm excited that as we're seeing things happening, it shows us that the return of Jesus is close. Again, when he's going to fix the world. And we all want Jesus to rule and reign and to have the glory of God all around. We all want that. That's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. It's the return of the king, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can be excited about that. And that's what I think fascinating too, is that people, as you say, have this knee-jerk reaction to this idea. But the reality is that God is going to do what he's going to do. It doesn't matter what we do. We cannot stop the things of God, right? So as you said, so they've five qualifying cows, $100,000 a piece. They get to Israel in 2022. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. September.
And they've been there since. So again, walk us through what qualifies, a red heifer, because it's funny when I looked into this at the beginning, they're not a red heifer in and of itself is not rare. These are not like, it's not like seeing, there's some Brahma cattle down the street from my house, and I see them and I'm like, man, it feels like I'm driving through India. This is really cool to see these things. I never see them, but they're not a rare, a rare breed, but the purity or what they're looking for is rare.
Mm-hmm. So and again, I try to tell people is, okay, you got to put your Jewish rabbi hat on for a moment, because we got to get into the mindset of, what they think. Now we know again, as we just said, the Bible says there's going to be a temple, but in their mind, they're thinking, okay, well, again, we don't care about the New Testament. They don't even know about those passages for the most part. So for them, they're thinking, okay, they have two sources of authority in their mind. One of them is the Bible. So they go to Numbers chapter 19. It's the only place that you see the red heifer prescriptions laid down. And so it talks about that it has to be a cow and not a calf, which means that it needs to be in its third year. And that's important. And we can define that. Eglah is the word for cow, for calf in Hebrew, and parah is the word for cow. So God says to Moses, I want you to have Israel bring a parah, bring a cow, and not a bull. It had to be female. It also could never have worked, couldn't have a yoke on it, and it needed to be unblemished, so no scars, no limping, all that. And then, so you have those biblical requirements. Well, in typical Jewish rabbinic fashion, they come up with these extra laws. I mean, what they call oral tradition.
Right.
We see the phrase, the tradition of the elders is the way it's described in the Gospels. Matthew 15 is one example. Jesus talks about, argues with the Pharisees about their tradition of the elders. So, but what the tradition of the elders, it isn't always bad. Now, we don't think of it as authoritative, inspired scripture by any means. They do. They think that it is, they call it, they have a Torah. So they have two different Torahs, one from heaven and one from earth. And for them, one's from Moses and one's from God. And so you have this oral tradition that they teach. which is just as equal and authoritative as what the written word is. So for them,
to them.
This is to them.
Yes.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
we don't embrace that.
They don't
Jesus
ascribe
didn't
to
embrace
this,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, that's important. So if we talk about the Mishnah was their oral tradition written down around 200 AD. So if we talk about the Mishnah or the Talmud, which is the Mishnah and the commentary on the Mishnah together in one group or one body of literature called the Talmud, Jerusalem and the Babylonian Talmud, two separate ones, but that's 500 AD roughly. So if we talk about those, again, we're not endorsing them as being legitimate, but remember, we have our Jewish rabbi hat on. So for them, they're thinking,
right.
They have a whole chapter on what they call the para adumah, the red cow, because what they were trying to do is they were trying to recognize, hey, look, the temple's gone. We need to write this down so that we don't forget because we're scattered into all the nations. And so in there, it describes what you said, and that is from the time of Moses until the first century, there were 9 red heifers that were, and they even had Moses, Ezra, they got the names of all the priests that were doing this. So that's all written down, and really, we'd call that ancient history. And so one of the other things that they do now is when they talk about it being red, it doesn't necessarily be like crimson red or bright red like we would know. It could be brown, a brownish red. But the Bible, God didn't say, hey, you have to have this many hairs or non-hairs. Well, the rabbis are thinking, well, we want to follow the commandment, and their heart was to follow the commandment. So we're going to make sure to do this. So we're going to bring these extra rules to make sure we don't err. And so the rule that they have today is you can have a black hair over here and a black hair over there on these cows. You can. But if there's more than one black hair or non-red hair in a single follicle, then it's out. So that's why you see them down there with their magnifying glasses.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you even pull that off? How do you even search?
That's how you do it. So they've added that, and then the other thing I'll mention, because there's some confusion out there, is it says 3 years old. Well, I know exactly when they're born. I talked to the guy; he was there, and as you guys mentioned as well, the farmers, the ranchers in that episode, I was there. I saw the cows being born, and I said, "Give me the dates," because when I interviewed him, I said, "This is going to be important." I knew that there was a time when they would become qualified. So I interviewed him in December of 22, so right after they had arrived. And he goes, oh, yeah. This is the date. I was there last year. He sent me pictures. There he is. So they were born October 5th through the 12th of 2021. So according to the rabbis, for them to be in their third year doesn't mean 36 months. That's for us. You just, like my grandson, I could say, oh, well, he's in his third year. Well, that means he's 24 months plus a month. That's his third year. It starts at that point. So for them, they've decided based on the Bible and their rabbinic rules that the cow has to be 2 years and 1 month old. That means it's a month into its third year and it qualifies. And that was roughly November 5th through the 12th of last year. So 7 months ago, whatever it is.
Mondo, can I ask a quick question then? Because it makes me think before I forget.
Yeah.
So this would have been 2 years exactly of the week that these red heifers were born.
Yep.
And that's when you see this attack on Israel by Hamas. And we get into that a little bit, like on the last episode, about how there's a lot of conjecture and they've said it now, which is fascinating, that what they were doing was trying to do that. Do you think it has to be the timing, right? They know that they're now within a month of these becoming of age, and it sounded like Hamas and their crew, if you will, whatever, their armies, whatever the terrorists and such there, were trying to get to these cows before they officially 2 years and a month. Is that wild, or is that a coincidence? Or
well, there's not a lot of coincidence.
Right.
The cows were pretty far north from Gaza, so I don't believe that they actually thought they could get that far up because they knew that they weren't getting that far anyway. They went into the surrounding communities, and then again, their goal wasn't to do anything more than, as we saw, to take hostages, and they went back. But I do think, though, that they actually anticipated a larger group of other sympathizers in what we call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria area, that's where the cows are. So I think they were looking to inspire others to go and then start something, which certainly would have included those cows being in Shiloh. In Shiloh's north of Jerusalem. It's in what we call the West Bank area. And so even though it's settled by Jews, there's Jewish people all around the area. But And the thing is, I was surprised that they have allowed the cows to be relatively unguarded, unprotected. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could. You don't have to hurt the cows, except you just go up there and all you got to do, put a razor blade or brand the cow. I mean, again, you don't have to kill the cow to bring a blemish on it. You just have to go up there and slice it. That's what I mean. And so they don't have to actually do anything like that. But what we do know is that, again, these cows are way out. They're in Shiloh, but they're relatively unprotected, which is kind of surprising to me that they don't do more on it. But I'll say this, just in this last section, is that the cows, one of them has been officially disqualified. And then another one is what I was told by Byron Stinson, who's the main guy that organized all this. So he's very familiar. He lives in Bethlehem. He goes, well, Mondo, the other one is still qualified. It's just not as red as the other three. But there are still three that are 100% solid. And again, I'm not a sensationalist. I'm not a person about hype. But we can say now that this is the first time in 1900 years that you have three, not just one, but you have three cows that are 100% qualified. There's nothing else left for them to be qualified. Now, they have to remain qualified up until the day that at least one of them is offered in the ceremony.
In the California Road Trip Republic, we believe you take adventure for a ride. Whether coastal cruising, mountain motoring, or redwood roaming, discover beauty around every turn. Your road trip can kick off from anywhere. Starting route. But it should always start at visitcalifornia.com. Then buckle up, crank those tunes, and discover why California is the ultimate playground.
So do you think there might be people actively trying to sabotage this? And are some Christians in support of this? I mean, where's the view kind of outside of it all? Like, because I'm sure some people, I mean, like any topic we talk about, there's people for it and against it, and it's just all over the place. I'm just, for people who don't really understand what's going on, trying to give a 5,000-foot view of this.
Yeah, there's going to be, people have opinions, and Christians are no different. And again, as we talked,
mostly Christians have a lot of opinions.
Yeah, exactly.
And
it's often again a knee-jerk reaction in many ways. And again, their love for Jesus. So they think because we're doing this or the Jews are doing this, somehow we're offending Jesus. And I'm like, hey, this is just, no one's endorsing this. But you have some Christians though that love Israel, that support Israel, and they are 100% on board with even contributing money to the building of the third temple and the caring of the cows. That's why one of the questions I asked in the book was, of these other prophecy teachers, is it okay for a Christian to donate money to this? Surprisingly, and I gave their answers. I didn't make any comment. And some of them had different answers. Some of them said, absolutely, this is wrong. Christians should not support this because this is part of what will eventually be desecrated by the Antichrist. But in addition, it is contributing to the Jewish rabbinic confusion as it relates to their own salvation. They think this is the way to get to maintain or to get salvation. Right. And we know that happens only through Jesus. And so on the other hand, you have others that go, well, again, it's bad. And you have others that say, yeah, I'm donating because I want to see prophecy come to pass. So I'm going to help prophecy come to pass.
That's wild.
It's wild.
Yeah.
So we've got three. And one of the things that we talked about, back in February when we were trading emails and also on the episode is that there's a specific date range. Mm-hmm. There are some, in your research and the people, your contacts, and some of what's also has been given out into media, as we've seen, there was a CBS News report that had some footage from the 90s, 80s or 90s. It was pretty wild in bunk in that sense. But we're coming right up on you've been told is the window. And what have you been told about when they at least would like to, if they had their druthers, do this sacrifice, and where? So the where is certainly easier. There's two pieces of property that this group, Bonei Israel, which is connected with the Temple Institute. Bonei Israel just is Hebrew. It means to build Israel. And it's an organization that's built for helping Israel in other ways. And they own a piece of property east of the Temple Mount and really northeast of the Temple Mount, because the instructions in the Mishnah is you have to be able to see the location of the temple. Even though there's no temple there, they still know that if you're looking from the
the Mount of Olives down, because the Mount of Olives is taller. It's taller, it's higher than the Temple Mount complex where the Dome of the Rock is. So you can see into the complex of the 37 acres there. So they have one piece of property that's northeast of that, and they have another one that is directly east near the Dominus Flevit Church. And so that's what you have. That's the where. It can only happen there. It can only happen on the Mount of Olives because that's, again, what the Mishnah says. So what's interesting is even going back to your guys' previous episode where you had one part where it was from an earlier time and then you gave an update. Well, I think the other one, if I remember right, it was in July they were talking about, and they had mentioned in that episode about the Passover. So you had this window, and Byron Stenson, again, who was there, he's the one that helped with the ranchers, and I've interviewed him and talked with him and emailed him, corresponded on all this. He came to me and in the interview he said, yeah, we want to have it during this window. Our hope is Passover of 2024 up until Shavuot, which is the Jewish Feast of Weeks, not the Feast of Pentecost. There's different dates from the Christians, and even though it's the same feast, there's just different Jewish dates on it, which is June 12th. So he goes, I said, well, does it have to be on a feast day? He goes, no, that was just a window we want to, because this was back in like October, November.
Yeah.
He said, that's just the window that we want to, because it's, with Passover, it's very well known, a lot of excitement in Israel about the Jewish, rabbis, and the religious are excited. So we think that would be fitting. Now, I was actually kind of surprised that they wouldn't have done it maybe in November when they became of age. But even then, when I was interviewing him, he said, no. I said, they're of age. What's the holdup? He goes, well, we want a celebration. We want to draw a lot of attention. And what he said to me, he emailed me and he said, Mondo, and I can say all this publicly. He didn't mind. Yeah. He said, pray for me because I'm trying to work out a way to live stream the ceremony to 800 million people.
Wow.
Oh.
So now I'll tell you this. Okay. So now we're talking and having this conversation with him in, probably December. And that was what he said. Mondo, we're on this. We're trying to get this. And so they're excited. He goes, we're working on the permitting with the state. The state's working on giving us the permits to have this big bonfire of this cow, and the area, the site is in an Arab area. So it's potentially very inflammatory. Well, then, Hamas comes out and says, one of the reasons we did this is because of the red cows. So all of a sudden, even with Byron himself, there was a shift that took place. And I remember I reached out to him. Hey man, how's it going? How'd it go? He goes, well, I said, I was getting ready to, I was going to Australia and New Zealand to do some prophecy conferences. And I said, hey, I'm going to be talking about the red heifers. And I just want to give people up-to-date information and accurate information. Is there anything that I can share? And so this was late January. And he said, well, as of right now, the Israeli government wants absolutely no publicity about the red heifers. So when Hamas came out and said what they said, it changed the attitude of the Israeli government, which again is very religious. And so since then, which, again, is the last couple of months, they've talked about Passover in very general ways, but they've actually kind of refrained now from talking about it. And even last week, they had a video where they were, the main rabbi said, oh no, there's no way it's going to happen on Passover.
Oh.
So, but here's...
Yeah, do you think do you think this is a shell game? Like they're just playing this like there's no way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
So I do think that, because that was not the attitude. They were like, oh, we're not ready. We're not prepared. That's the official stance. I don't know anybody's heart on that. But what I do find interesting is that even if they wanted to do it, you can't have this level of bonfire without the Arabs knowing it. And now they've been tipped off by Hamas and, of course, CBS News. That video was a total hit piece on Israel. And he interviewed Yitzhak Momo, which were the rabbis, right there on location. That was the spot. And then, again, brought up that other false footage, trying to say, look at what Israel's doing to provoke Hamas.
Yeah. It's really complicated. I feel like you have, like anything, there's really no black and white. There's a whole wide array of characters and desires and outcomes. I mean, it's just like any other topic we talk about. There's so many people that want one or the other, and sometimes it's all the above. You have the good and the bad living in both countries, and they all have different desires. I mean, You've done a ton of research on this. When is the last time we got close to having a heifer?
Back Clyde Lott was one of the first ones in America. He was a rancher in Mississippi, and Rabbi Richmond came out to Mississippi. This was back in the early 90s.
Okay.
And then what you had throughout the next, until now, from the 90s on, is you'd have that cow didn't last very long. Okay. Then you might have to wait a few years, and then, oh, look, there's a potential red. They go check it out. Sure enough, 3 months later, then you wait another 4 years. And so you have these gaps in waiting. I remember writing about one in 2018. It was born, and I was like, oh, here we go. We don't have to wait too long. We only have to wait a couple of years to see. And sure enough, it got disqualified. And then, and then it just ends, right? People forget about it. Yeah, one day. But what you have, at least in this situation, is this rancher, Ty Davenport. I mean, he's down in Rockwall, Texas. I mean, again, it's well known. I'm not giving any information that's not public. And he got this red Angus from Montana, and him and his dad go out and they find it, and he's like, I want to raise and breed red Angus for one reason, because one day I'm hoping that one of these will be the red heifer that is slaughtered in Israel for the temple. He's a Christian. Okay. This is his whole goal. And so he understood prophecy. And so he's got this big ranch now. There's other ranchers that are breeding these red Angus. So of the 5, 4 of them are red Angus, and one of them was called St. Gertrudis, another breed of cow. But also now you have breeding programs in Israel. So what the one guy shared with me was, hey, look, if these 5 aren't good, we have a dozen others that are potentials still in Texas. So the breeding program, this is what changed. Okay. You had a lot of spotty stuff here and there for years from the 1980s. And now we have full breeding programs, many places in Texas and also in the land of Israel. And so because of that, they are actively, again, now there's dozens of potentials that are born all the time. And so that's what's changed. You didn't have this, again, even 40 years ago.
Yeah. Or there's a concerted effort. Like that people are trying. Yeah.
100%.
Yep. I want to ask, because we're as we come up on Passover here, and you're looking at the 22nd of April to June 12th. I know you're going to have to prognosticate here, but like, what is your gut on? Is this going to happen? Like, I mean, because there has to be a sense of urgency. Like, that's what I'm thinking the whole time. Is like, okay, you got a qualifier, and then in November they're of age. Mm-hmm. So as you kind of alluded to, like, there's got to be a little bit of sense of urgency. Because what's your gut here? Are they going to do it? Do you believe they're going to do it between now and June 12th?
I went several interviews I did last fall. Again, I said publicly, hey, if they were, which they weren't, if they were asking me, hey, Mondo, when do you think? Because again, I was waiting for November. Like, man, I'm having interviews. It's going to be in a month. It's going to be in 2 weeks. Hey, guys, this date's coming up. We know that. And as of right now, there's no definitive upper range in the sense of, can they be 4? Can they be 5? Can they be 6? Yeah, in the rabbinic literature, you have different answers, and so they haven't decided.
You have a floor. Like, really, you don't have a ceiling.
Yes, you have a floor, and they haven't defined a ceiling yet. But as we know, every day you wait, there's more opportunity for one of them to be disqualified. Which again, that's been the history. They get excited, and then it becomes disqualified. So I felt that even back then. First of all, you guys need to stop talking about this. You just need to go do it in secret and video it. Yeah. And then afterwards say, hey, everybody, congratulations. We've done it. I think now the cat is out of the bag. So my gut feeling is that in coinciding with what Hamas has said and the increased pressure, from the world government. So like right now, again, there's a war in Gaza. And then, of course, we see this would happen with Iran in this last weekend. Israel, before the thing with Iran, with the 300 plus, drones and missiles, they were getting pressed by the Biden administration and by Europe and by the United Nations. And so I think that's what changed is Netanyahu is a politician amongst first and foremost. So he's like, okay, I'm not going to grant permission to these people, even though in his administration, Itamar Ben-Gvir is very much, he's one of the ministers there, very religious. The first day they came into power, when he came into that coalition, this religious coalition, he went on the Temple Mount. He walked right up on there just to show that he could. And so he's very much interested in changing the status quo. But Netanyahu is the ultimate decider. And so when he's getting this pressure by Biden, or think about it in terms of this existential threat that France, other countries are not going to provide weapons for them. They're not going to allow them to restock their Iron Dome systems. He's thinking, are we going to risk provoking our allies for a cow?
Right.
So because of that, I don't think they're going to grant permission for a while.
So that's a question I was going to wonder. How intimately involved are the politicians, Israeli government, into this? Because you have the Boneh, is it
Boneh Israel,
right? Boneh Israel group, the Temple Institute, I think, is another part of this. So you have these I don't know if they're government or not. It would appear like, NGOs.
They're NGOs. Yep.
Right. Yeah. That are involved in this because of the Jewish faith. But it sounds like what you're saying that it also requires a sign off from sort of the highest, from Netanyahu. So how intimately involved, the government's super intimately involved in greenlighting this, or will they just go do it?
See, I think that's what it comes down to is, so let's talk about that. There's a difference in American, or I would say most Western, let's say non-Israeli situations. In Israel, everybody operates under one banner, and that's security. So they have a blend between their military, the army, and even the local police. They all blend together under this administration, where we have, of course, because of our states, we have the army. I mean, the local police aren't messing with the army. They're totally different branches. Right. Israel's not like that. And so because the local police go up the chain of the command, it ultimately comes to the government itself. Now, all that being said, I don't think the Israeli government is going to give permission. So, but what I do know, though, is the Jewish people, the Jewish rabbis, they have tried in the past. Like, for example, there was a rumor that was going out just a few days ago. There was a picture of this document that was in Hebrew, and it was another mythbuster. And they were saying the rabbis asked for permission to offer the red heifer slaughter on Passover. Here's the document. Okay. Well, that's not what the document said. The document actually was a legitimate document requesting permission from the police who managed the Temple Mount security. They were asking to bring their korban sacrifice for Passover up to the the Temple Mount in order to slaughter this animal as a rehearsal. And so this document was put all over the internet. And you're like, well, and of course it's hype, right? Sensationalism.
Right.
Well, the fact of the matter is they ask that every year. Every year. This doc, it's nothing new. Every year. Yeah. I've been talking about it for a long time. Oh, they're asking it again. And what happens? Rejected. So even though, and they have tried to smuggle animals up on the Temple Mount.
Oh, man.
And of course the police are right on them. I mean, immediately, because they know this is a powder keg. So the fact that the Jewish mind would say, you know what? We don't obey secular government. We obey God, and God told us to do this commandment. We're going to do it. The problem with that, and I'm not saying they don't have the willingness to do it. They have the chutzpah, right? They have the guts to do it.
Right.
Here's the thing. It's way too close to all the action. There's no way, again, if it didn't require smoke,
right,
a bonfire, they absolutely would do it.
So they essentially require the security. That's what you're saying. Like they don't need the sign off in theory, but they need the protection in reality, right? So it is going to be part and parcel. It's so interesting because you make a good point. You're not going to have a huge fire on the Mount of Olives in Arab territory without proper security, and that's a beacon for
perfect word.
Yeah, for attack. Do you have any thoughts on, but do you think there's any significance to this attack and the timing of what we would consider in the next maybe a couple months?
I think in the sense of even within Islam, you have Sunni Islam and Shia Islam,
right?
And the Iranians are Shiites, and they are 100% interested in taking over Islam and being, again, you mentioned the caliphate. They want to disarm and dethrone, so to speak, Saudi Arabia and the Sunni Muslims. So the fact that they have this war with Israel, again, that Israel's easy to pick on, and then it builds everybody up and goes, oh, wow, look, Iran's willing to stand up to Israel. But this latest thing, no doubt, it takes it up a notch. Again, it escalates it because Iran has been funding and providing weapons to all the Hezbollah in the north, Hamas, Syria, you name it, all around there. But this latest thing with them doing and the timing and launching this many missiles, again, it perpetuates the the attention that is happening with Israel, their independence. And again, we can't get rid of the Hamas situation and what they said again about the cows, the red cows, the way that they say it. So for Iran to do this right now certainly has a part to play in all of the overall picture, and it just contributes to the increased security. And so again, here, what Iran, I mean, these guys are ancient Persians, right? I mean, if you study them, they're smart, okay? They're clever. Yeah. And they know the pressure that is being put on Israel. And so to increase the pressure on Israel from these allied countries, again, we're very close to turning our back on them in many ways. We've already done that. They recognize this will put a halt to all of the whole Third Temple movements, heifers, all of it. They know that the Israeli government cannot. Remember, most of them are secular. There's a few religious parties in the current administration of Israel, but they're certainly not the majority. And so they recognize the power they have to play to interrupt all of these religious movements.
That's interesting because it's not a foregone conclusion, right? I think sometimes we think that. I mean, there's a scenario here, Mondo, where they don't get sacrificed. This doesn't happen. Yeah,
for a while. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, I mean, think about it. Like, you have the third most holy site in Islam. This is top Temple Mount, and this is a direct salvo over the bow of the Islamic world as well. Because now your next step, of course, is to build the temple, which everyone knows where it goes.
Yeah.
Mondo, how do you balance your opinion on Israel, the people of Israel, versus sort of the mechanism, the arm of the government and the state? And there's all these questions of Zionism and everything else. How do you balance that perspective?
You know, it's interesting because I have a chapter on that in a book. You bring up a very logical question, and that's what I was trying to anticipate, is say, okay, how do we as Christians navigate these waters? Because, you know, there's a lot of people that, you know, say, I stand with Israel, I stand with Israel. And certainly, I mean, I will say, yeah, I stand with Israel. But let me clarify what that means.
What are you saying? Yeah, what are you saying?
It doesn't mean, right. Because ultimately what that means what I think is from a biblical Christian perspective is that God made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, going way back. And he promised, and that extends all the way down to the time of Jesus in the first century. That first of all, whose land is it? Well, it's God's land. God says it. This is my land. Okay, amongst all the other land, he owns it all, but specifically, this is my land. This area, and I gave it to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the Jews. So that has never been rescinded. It's never changed. It'll always be there. Romans 11, it's irrevocable. So in that sense, even in Joel chapter 3, interestingly, one of the reasons for Armageddon. Okay, think the Battle of Armageddon. One of the judgments of Armageddon is God judging the nations for those who tried to divide his land. I mean, that's like straight out of the modern what? So as we see this debate that's happening over the land of Israel, dividing here, two-state solution, it's Joel chapter 3. And so we see as well in Zechariah chapter 12 that these prophetic elements that are happening at the end of the age, God says, at that time, I'll make Jerusalem a cup of trembling, a burdensome stone. All the nations are going to be just troubled with this. Jerusalem, Jerusalem. And that's what we see. And so we're seeing prophecy be fulfilled. So let me say this. On one hand, I stand with Israel. They have a right to be in the land, even internationally. I mean, the United Nations, 1947, they agreed to this. So they have a right to the land for sure. And so when you think about that, I stand with Israel's right to the land biblically, as well as international treaties that were made by the United Nations and others. But what you see there is, does that mean that that God approves of everything the state of Israel does? Heavens no. Think about the Old Testament. God said, look, you're my people, but I'm going to judge you. And I quote in the book in Deuteronomy 9, going way back with Moses, he says, look, God's given you this land, okay? But don't say to yourself, it's because we were righteous. Don't say to yourself, it's because we're pure. God says, no, I'm giving you this land because I made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so in the same way, I take that passage, apply it right to today's situation. Is Israel doing everything right? Nope. Do they deserve the land? Nope. But it is theirs by covenant and by international law. Now, that does not mean, that's the balance. It doesn't mean that everything they do is right. And again, at the end of the day, when you do see, for example, the negotiations of two states, etc. Again, I get into this all the time. It's just I've been watching this for a long time and studying modern Israel. Well, you look at the Palestinians, and even again, what's my heart for the Palestinians? I pray for them. I want them to see no salvation. So they're not my enemies. We want them to be saved. But what we also know is Hamas has said very clearly, look, yeah, we want a two-state, but the two-state includes no Jews anywhere. Well, that's not really a two-state solution. And so when you try to balance it out, I think Israel, because of the surrounding enemies, they are going to be navigating this acrimony all the way to the end, and there is going to be no solution. They've tried it for a long time. You've seen some surrounding things, but I think we maintain that balance between Israel is not a perfect nation. It never was, never will be. And so when they do wrong, we should call them out. But we also recognize, again, biblically and international law, that the land, they do belong in the land.
Yeah.
That's why I think that this is it's so fascinating. It is to our audience. I think it is to a lot of people, because it's not, I don't know. We kind of on the beginning of this, right? It's the end times thing has been, at least in Western Christianity and in our lifetimes, has been one of the things that's end times prophecy, end times get ready, it's coming, Christ is coming back in 99 or whenever with the eclipse, with the eclipse this year. I mean, it's everything is somehow connected, which kind of in some ways probably jades a lot of people. Those to me, I'm like, nothing's happening. This is how it always goes, right? But these kind of things, though, I don't think you can poo-poo in the same way, because we have very real sort of steps. So you have these things that have to happen. There has to be a red heifer sacrifice in order for purification rites and the rituals, and then that has to that becomes before a temple. There has to be a temple, as you said at the beginning, for the Antichrist, the man of perdition, to seat himself and call himself God, and that is very much in the end of the age.
It's not going away. I mean, again, prophecy says this, and this is the substance we have, which is real, and that's where you could say, well, the mechanisms of how it happened, that's the blurry part. Okay,
yeah,
right.
That's how we don't know. It comes, ebbs and flows, but the substance is there, and it's real. And it's heading towards a direction. And these are conversations that, again, nobody was having like this level of conversation 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I mean, maybe certainly temple, different things. But all that's done. It's like, okay, we got everything ready. It's sitting there on the shelf. We're just waiting for the right time. And so that's what we're waiting for. And to see all of it ebb and flow, we know where it's going. We just have to wait.
If we were to say this happens in the next 2 months, how quickly do you think the Israelis move to begin rebuilding the temple? And do they do that on the Temple Mount? Because, I mean, there's no timeline on that. But once you have everything, you kind of have everything loaded.
I think that if the ceremony is done, it'll be interesting, the politics, because, Netanyahu, they're usually on a 4-year cycle. But in their parliamentary system, the government can fail at any time, and they immediately have elections. That's why there was, a handful of elections in the past few years, basically from 19 to 21. And so it would be interesting to see how Netanyahu survives this. Right now, there's unity because of the Hamas attacks, as well as what's happening with Iran.
Right.
So if that gets blown over and settles, the other groups that are in Israel, they are out for his blood. I mean, they would love to get rid of him today, but they're realizing for political expediency and public opinion, they don't want to show themselves as sounding disunified. Okay. But if he gets put out and you have this other group, and then they they form a coalition of a government that doesn't include the religious, well, then now that would postpone it for a long time, because the leftist group in Israel, they very much are into appeasement. They're the ones that are like, well, yeah, the thing with Iran is fine, it's good, whatever. And so they're not hawks in that way. And so that's the hard part that you see, is things can change in a moment based on the government of Israel.
Yeah.
I also think it's interesting too, and this is not a question, but it's interesting that as Americans, we sit here and realize that our government, because I don't want to say we, by proxy, we are tax dollars, is actually funding both sides of all of this, which is pretty gross, honestly.
Well, that's kind of how it is. I think that we've talked about, Mondo, how that's always, it seems like that's always been the case. And if from the beginning, Satan put the watchers up to it, to come down here and mess with it. And then he was playing both sides from the beginning, And it seems like those themes is like human beings are easily influenced, by there's just fourth dimensions sort of that we forget involved in all these wars and involved with all this conflict. And there's multiple opinions and outcomes desired. What is your opinion? How do you feel about it? And what do you kind of see happening in the next several months? What do you think is going to happen?
I think there's no doubt that there's going to be an escalation unless the United States does some secret threat against Israel. Israel knows. I mean, Israel's born out of the Holocaust, right? They saw the betrayal of the British mandate, going way back to 1922. So they're very untrustworthy of their allies, so-called. And so even this is why you see them over and over saying, listen, we want to have the support of the United States, but if we have to go it alone, we will. Because they know in history who stood up for them but themselves. They don't trust anybody to protect their existential identity, and they know they can't. So that being the case, I find it interesting that just like Iran, this latest thing, Israel, again, Iran has all of its proxies around Israel, especially Lebanon, Hezbollah. So when a few weeks ago, Israel bombed the next door building to the consulate in Damascus, which killed several Iranian generals who were part of the planning of the October 7th. So Israel's perspective, hey, you know what? You're fair game. Well, then Iran steps in and says, well, we got to save face now, because remember, what's their goal? Their goal is to look tough to the other Muslim world. And so they're like, okay, well, we're going to bomb, and we're going to retaliate for this. Well, then there's records now that they communicated to the U.S. and said, we're going to bomb them. And the Biden administration said, yeah, go ahead. You just do it within certain limits. So then, like you mentioned, what do you have? You have them providing the weapons, but then you also have them releasing $10 billion to Iran. And so we also have the other agenda that if now Israel's saying, well, we got to save face. So we got to go bomb something, and maybe we'll bomb the oil refineries. Well, then that makes the globalists super happy, because now gas is $7 a gallon. And so you have all these machinations that are going on. Everybody has their own agenda. But the key thing also, what you said was Ephesians 6:12, our warfare, our wrestling match is we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Principalities, powers, all these, as we know from the Michael Heiser worldview, it's great, Deuteronomy 32. These players are in there, and what's their goal? Well, their goal is the destruction of humanity, but they see as well, our time is coming. And where they get to rule Revelation 12 says quite clearly that Satan gets cast down from heaven, his access is denied, and it says he comes down to the earth knowing that his time is short, and he comes down with great wrath. And so they see the end game coming as well, and they're pushing it really hard because Satan's going to get his time. I mean, it's fascinating when you think about what does he always want? He wants worship. He said that to Jesus, worship me, worship me. And Isaiah 14, I want to be above the stars to receive worship. And he gets worship in that tribulation 7-year period. They worship the dragon. I mean, it's crazy thinking about it, but they will. So all of this contributes to that, and it comes through chaos. And certainly Iran is going to, again, even they're studying their eschatology. Well, they want to bring in their own Messiah figure, the Mahdi. And how do you do that? You do it through chaos, world wars, nuclear weapons. Man, they're just eager to make it happen.
Wow. Thank you, Mondo. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's complicated topics always on our some of these things are outside of our wheelhouse in some ways, because we talk about more like specific creatures and things that relate to it. But this is definitely interesting, and it does play into sort of the historical stuff that we get into a lot on our show, and we appreciate you coming on. And
I like what you said there too about the knowing the time is short, because it makes me think of the man of the tombs, right? The demoniac, and if you think of demons as the lowest level sort of things, they're like, it's not time yet. What do you and you realize, these principalities, the Psalm 82, for to hypothesize that's the judgment of the Elohim that rebelled in Deuteronomy 32, and they've already been told that they're going to die like men.
Yep.
And so their goal then is destruction. Even I think we talked to Dr. Joel Muddamale about this, and he believes that they were the work of the cross really, really mortally wounded their abilities to do things, right? Which of course, but they're still active and trying to as you say, bring chaos. And right, and isn't it interesting that the messianic worldview of the Muslim world is a Messiah through chaos, and that's what we're seeing. That's fascinating, man. Hey, thanks so much for reaching out, Mondo.
Yeah.
It's so good to see you. We didn't touch on this at the very beginning, but we met at Tim Alberino's conference here in Nashville, and Nate and I didn't know what we were doing. We were the opening band, if you will, because we did the interview at the beginning, and you were so gracious to us then, and you sent us Bigfoot footprint pictures,
Yep.
and it's been awesome. You spent 30 years, on this topic, so there's no better person that I think there anywhere to really espouse upon what's happening, here and now. So, on the Red Heifer Reloaded, or whatever we call this thing, grateful to have you. Hey, let everybody know who's listening where they can find you, your book, your work. I know you're with Prophecy Watchers, so let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We're prophecywatchers.com is our main hub. You can go there and where to watch and listen. We're on television, radio and podcasting and other YouTube and stuff. And then of course I have my book there. We have the really the largest online bookstore as it relates to prophecy anywhere in the world. Probably besides Amazon for sure, but it's specifically devoted to prophecy, so they can get it there. My book is on Amazon too, if you feel you need to support Jeff Bezos. But
and his next super yacht.
Yeah, exactly. His underground bunker, him and Zuckerberg. but guys, it's a blessing. It was great meeting you, and I get a lot.
We'll have to do it again.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
We'll have to do it again.
Thanks, Mondo. Appreciate it.
Keep watching for that prophecy. Just keep on watching.
If something happens, I will keep you guys in the loop.
Let us know, brother. Thanks again, man. You guys go check out what Mondo's doing. Check out Prophecy Watchers. Of course, we have other friends on the show that have been and are there. And, Josh Peck comes to mind. He's recently added over there, but
I'm supposed to interview Tim next week, so with his new project, so that'll be fun.
Oh, there you go. All right. Well, brother, we love you, man. We're grateful for your time. Thanks again for your work, and we'll keep an eye on what happens in the next few weeks and months, and maybe we'll have to do this again if it happens.
If it happens,
but, it happens.
The world will be changed. That's
it will
for sure in many ways.
Thanks, Mondo.
Good to see
All
you,
right, guys.
brother. Yeah.
Blessings.
See you.
Yeah. See you, bro.